10 matches. That is the number that has half the football world talking today. 10 matches of suspension for one single player. A figure that in almost any other situation would sound excessive, almost unbelievable, but that FIFA has now officially confirmed against Leandro Paredes, the Boca Juniors midfielder, who only a month ago was considered one of the most respected midfielders in the Argentina national team and who today has suddenly become the most heavily punished player of the entire 2000 World Cup. Alongside him comes Nahuel Molina, suspended for 7 international matches. And behind both of them, as if the list simply could not stop growing, appears the name of Roberto Ayala, one of Lionel Scaloni's assistant coaches, a man whose job was precisely to prevent situations from getting out of control, yet who has also been punished with 3 matches for striking an opponent during the chaos on the field. And as if that were not enough, the Argentine Football Association has been hit with a $321,000 fine and will be forced to play its next 2 home matches with the stadium operating at half capacity, a punishment rarely seen outside the most serious disciplinary cases involving the organization in recent history. Everything happened after Argentina lost the final, after falling 1-0 to Spain on July 19th in New Jersey. As though the sporting defeat itself had not been painful enough, what happened immediately after the final whistle ended up costing Argentina far more than a trophy. To understand how this situation reached this point, we have to go back to the exact moment when the referee ended the biggest match in world football. Spain had just won its first Men's World Cup in more than a decade, and its players began celebrating in the way any national team celebrates a victory of that magnitude, running toward one another, embracing, looking toward their families in the stands. It was precisely during that moment of pure celebration that the cameras captured something that had absolutely nothing to do with the football that had just been played. Leandro Paredes, one of the most experienced players in the Argentine squad, someone who had already played Champions League finals and previous World Cups without ever becoming involved in a controversy of this scale, was seen grabbing Eric Garcia, the Spanish defender, around the neck in what the footage appears to show as a direct and sustained hold. Moments later, Paredes also brought down Gavi, the Barcelona midfielder, and pushed him while he was already on the ground. It was not simply a brief collision. It was not one isolated shove during the normal confusion that can follow a massive final. These were separate actions, happening one after another, with each moment captured by different cameras from different angles. And that is precisely why FIFA eventually opened 3 separate aggression charges against Paredes under Article 14 of its disciplinary code, instead of treating everything as one confusing incident. What makes the Paredes case even more striking is not simply what happened that night, but who he was before that night. A player developed at the highest level of European football, a World Cup champion in Qatar 2022, and one of the strongest voices inside Scaloni's dressing room. He was the kind of experienced midfielder coaches often trusted to calm younger players when emotions became intense, and yet he was the exact player who lost control at the worst possible moment. In front of cameras watching from every corner of the planet, at the conclusion of the biggest final of the year, there was no technical mistake. There was no controversial referee decision that suddenly changed the game. There was a human decision made in the heat of the moment, at precisely the wrong second. And that decision has now cost him 10 matches away from representing his country, along with a $90,000 fine and a stain that could follow him for the rest of his career. Nahuel Molina did not escape the disciplinary storm either. While Spain was celebrating, Captain Rodri was moving toward his teammates to join the celebrations when, according to the investigation, Molina struck him in the stomach as they passed each other. Rodri stopped, turned around, and for a moment, the captain of the newly crowned world champions and the Argentine fullback stood face to face in a tense confrontation that the cameras immediately captured. FIFA decided to treat that strike and the confrontation that followed as separate incidents, eventually adding 2 aggression charges, along with another charge for unsporting conduct. The final punishment, now officially confirmed, is 7 matches of suspension and the same $90,000 fine handed to Paredes. What makes Molina's situation particularly uncomfortable is that he now has to return to training in Madrid, inside a club environment where many members of the squad are Spanish, where the World Cup victory is still fresh in everyone's memory, and where the name Rodri, the player he allegedly struck, remains a source of enormous national pride. But if there is one case that truly changes the tone of this entire controversy, it is Roberto Ayala's. We are not talking about a footballer caught up in the emotional explosion of a painful defeat. We are talking about a member of the coaching staff, someone whose responsibility within Scaloni's structure is precisely to calm situations, mediate disputes and prevent emotions from boiling over. The images reviewed by FIFA show Ayala striking Dani Olmo, the Spanish winger, in the face. During the same confrontation that erupted after the final whistle, a member of the coaching staff who was expected to help put out the fire instead, according to the official ruling, ended up adding fuel to it. The punishment was lighter than those given to the players: 3 matches of suspension and a $30,000 fine. But the symbolic impact of seeing an assistant coach sanctioned for an act of aggression is something entirely different. It raises questions not only about individual behavior, but about the level of control inside the Argentine delegation during those chaotic minutes. What makes the situation even more uncomfortable is that Dani Olmo publicly criticized the behavior of members of the Argentine delegation during the medal ceremony itself. After receiving their medals, several Argentine players walked toward the section occupied by their supporters and turned their backs on the ceremony involving the champions, a gesture that created even more anger among Spanish supporters and officials. FIFA also considered the broader behavior of the delegation during those minutes when examining the overall conduct surrounding the final. The disciplinary investigation was therefore no longer limited to one isolated confrontation between individual players. It began to look more like a larger pattern involving several people and several different incidents. Thiago Almada appears in a completely different part of this disciplinary map. He was not accused of a specific punch or a clearly identified physical action like the incidents involving the other players. Instead, his name entered the investigation over unsporting conduct under the same Article 14 framework, which covers improper behavior that does not necessarily rise to the level of direct physical aggression. His punishment ended up being the lightest among the Argentine players involved: 1 match of suspension and a $30,000 fine. It is not the kind of punishment expected to define a player's entire career, but it remains another reminder of just how broad FIFA's disciplinary investigation became after that night. And then comes the twist that has probably divided public opinion more than anything else in this entire case. Gavi, the same player who was brought down and pushed by Paredes while he was already on the ground, the same player identified as a direct victim in the case that eventually led to Paredes receiving 10 matches, also received a punishment of his own. Gavi was handed a 1-match suspension and a $30,000 fine for unsporting conduct during the same confrontation. That detail completely changes the simple narrative of aggressors versus victims, because it shows that FIFA did not evaluate the confrontation as one single event with one single guilty party. Instead, the disciplinary authorities examined the behavior of every individual involved separately, regardless of who started the confrontation or who appeared to be the main aggressor. Gavi himself had publicly indicated that he did not want Paredes to receive a lengthy suspension for what happened, a gesture of sportsmanship that contrasts sharply with the eventual result of the disciplinary process. In the final ruling, he ended up occupying the unusual position of being recognized as one of the direct victims of the incident, while also becoming one of the people punished for his own conduct during the confrontation. But all of these individual cases still do not tell the complete story. To understand the scale of what happened, we also have to look at the Argentine Football Association itself. because the organization came under FIFA's scrutiny as well, and not simply because of what happened during those few minutes following the final. The investigation expanded into several different matches throughout the tournament, examining separate sections of FIFA's disciplinary code. One of those cases involved using a sporting event for demonstrations or messages unrelated to the sport itself, and that charge was connected to a banner displayed by a group of Argentine players after defeating England in the semi-finals. The banner referenced Argentina's claim of sovereignty over the Falkland Islands, a subject that remains politically sensitive in the United Kingdom and in other parts of the international community. FIFA treated the display as part of a broader disciplinary review rather than viewing it as something completely separate from the rest of the tournament. Another part of the investigation concerned improper team conduct, discrimination and racist behavior connected to chants and gestures attributed to sections of the supporters and the wider team environment during different matches at the World Cup. A third area of concern focused on stadium order and security, including reports of objects being thrown by supporters and inappropriate messages being displayed during several match days. In other words, FIFA was not simply examining one bad night. The governing body was examining what it viewed as a repeated pattern of behavior across the tournament, and the result of that broader investigation was a $321,000 fine against the Argentine Football Association. In addition to the financial punishment, Argentina will have to play its next 2 home matches with the stadium capacity reduced by half. That directly affects revenue, atmosphere, and the relationship between the national team and its supporters during its upcoming international fixtures. Now add together all the numbers we have just gone through. 10 matches for Paredes, 7 for Molina, 3 for Ayala, 1 for Almada, and another one for Gavi on the Spanish side. That gives us 22 matches of suspension, distributed among 5 people, following one night of chaos. And that total does not even include the individual financial penalties, which together exceed $300,000 among the players and coaching staff, nor does it include the separate institutional punishment imposed on the Argentine Football Association. It is a remarkable concentration of disciplinary penalties from a single World Cup incident, and it leaves a major question hanging over Argentina's upcoming international schedule. The national team will have to rebuild important parts of its midfield and defense without 2 of its most experienced players, while also carrying the symbolic weight of being one of the most heavily punished teams of the entire tournament. And perhaps that is the most uncomfortable image of this entire story. Argentina lost the final without registering a single shot on target. It lost the biggest match of its generation in one of the quietest ways possible on the pitch, and yet outside the pitch, Argentina became the absolute center of headlines during the weeks that followed. Not because of the football it played, but because of what happened after the football had already ended. Spain took the trophy. Spain celebrated. Spain's players were able to enjoy the moment with relatively little disciplinary fallout, with the exception of the specific Gavi case. Argentina, meanwhile, is left with suspensions, fines, a stadium operating at half capacity for its next home matches, and the growing feeling that something broke that night, which will take far more than a few months to repair. The Argentine Football Association has already indicated that it will request the full reasoning behind the disciplinary decisions, opening the possibility of an appeal before the FIFA Appeal Committee or even higher authorities if the organization decides that some of the punishments were excessive. That means that while the numbers we have today are official and confirmed, the story may not be finished. The situation could still change in the coming weeks, and this disciplinary file, far from disappearing after today's announcement, could continue generating headlines for a long time. So the biggest question is now yours. Do you believe the 10-match suspension handed to Paredes is fair? Considering the seriousness of what the footage appears to show, do you think FIFA went too far, or do you believe the punishment fits the incident? And what about Gavi? How do you view the decision to punish a player who was also identified within the disciplinary file as one of the direct victims of Paredes' actions? Let me know what you think in the comments, because this is one of those football stories capable of completely dividing supporters around the world. If you found this analysis useful, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who closely follows international football. Because over the next few weeks, there will almost certainly be more developments surrounding this disciplinary case, and we do not want you to miss a single detail.